Hello everyone and welcome. Sit back, relax, and get comfortable because this is a wonderful time for news stories from Yellowcat. Write your favorite stories in the comments below and maybe they'll be in our new video. Let's get started. What is the most terrible failure you've witnessed at work? Back in the dark ages, I worked for a small-town daily newspaper. There was one large discount store that refused to advertise with us and would only use the other paper in town, our sole rival, which was more of a weekly shopper type paper. For unknown reasons, store decided to give our paper a chance. Ad ran, and there in the double truck full color ad was men's shirts $99.99 minus the ever important R in shirts. Yep. Men's S's. Needless to say, they stuck with the other paper. I don't know if this qualifies as an error, but there used to be this new man in the kitchen where I used to work. When it wasn't busy, some individuals would prepare food while listening to music in the kitchen, which had its ups and downs. The guy went above and beyond by beginning to watch InfoWars on his phone while he was preparing. But the problem wasn't there. The real problem is that he's still watching GD Alex Jones on his iPhone when we do become busy and the other 8 employees in the kitchen are working their A's off to make food. Even though we're shouting commands at him and he's missing half of what we're saying, he never seems to receive the message that he needs to remove his earbuds and perform his duty. He was fired pretty soon after. I used to work as a systems engineer for an unknown maker of fault-tolerant Unix computers. I was at a customer setting up a massive machine to perform a database benchmark at the time. The machine was quite expensive and had about 10 42U refrigerator-sized racks in it. Disk drive trays filled 9 of these 10 racks. It was crucial that we set up and calibrated the machine in time for a test that would begin the next day because it was a fairly large system for its time. The database engineer who was in charge of setting up, fine-tuning, and loading the enormous volume of test data was with me when I was there. When we were using dumb terminals, it was ye olden days. The task took the entire day to accomplish, and as Mr. Database Engineer cleaned up after us, I was on the phone to HQ to report that everything was ready. We had to catch a flight, therefore he was utilizing numerous terminal sessions, switching between them by pressing the control key. Imagine terminal windows without actual graphical windows. Just as I noticed the full wall of disk activity lights flash solidly at once, I remember thinking, he's gonna screw up. My stomach dropped. I had a gut feeling about what had just happened. He executed what most Unix/Linux administrators refer to as a thoughtless joke, rm-r/. He deleted the operating system and all the disks for the Cayman. While still on the phone with headquarters, I informed them that we had made a mistake and would have to pay additional travel expenses. The database guru apologizes. Will likely return the following week, I suppose. No, I answer. We're pulling an all-nighter to get back to where we were. The night was extremely lengthy and sleepless. We were running a benchmark for a health insurance firm at another time years ago, working for a sizable computer manufacturer that you most definitely do know on a sizable supercomputer class machine. They provided us with access to their actual client data, terabytes worth of raw data. Our benchmark center manager set up a Windows server on the public interface so that anyone could download a demo version of the backup software and extract the data because it was in some proprietary backup format, an unpatched, brand new Windows server. After loading the data, we eventually returned home for the weekend. I arrived at work on Monday to find a fairly critical note from corporate security. Someone had received a phishing email with a link to a phony gank website using our benchmark center's IP address. In actuality, it was the Windows server that had been configured to download the backup software. MIT was compromised shortly after it was set up, as an unpatched Windows server left online is prone to do. It shared a network with perhaps 1 million people's HIPAA-protected medical records. Several people, including myself, would be dismissed if the data was compromised. Fortunately, I had already turned down both the benchmark system and the storage system that contained the data, and logs showed that it had been offline for some time prior to the attack. Jobs were preserved. We sold some very large equipment to the insurance business after a successful benchmark. Worst IT oopsie I saw was a coworker with whom I worked and was trying to train, but he just didn't listen to half of what I'd said and had an attitude. I had taken care of his technological errors for him, averted a few catastrophes, and warned him to please be more cautious and consult me before putting anything out to systems with more than 2,000 users. He gave management a lot of BS and claimed credit for a lot of the work I did to remedy his shoddy work, which earned him a promotion and made him essentially my boss. I had informed management that the promotion was dooming him to failure because his performance was at best mediocre. He'll be alright, I was assured. I was told he knows what he's doing. They didn't know anything. He starts lecturing me about how I should be doing my job better 2 weeks after getting promoted, and then he releases an update that breaks people's web browsers. When management intervenes, they query me. What can be done? I create a remedy in approximately 30 minutes, and I push it out to fix the damage to a few hundred systems within an hour. I then caution management once more, saying that this is a dangerous omen and that the next time could be far worse. I continue to hear from them, management, that I'm overreacting. Exactly, whatever. After another 2 weeks pass, a manager calls to say he needs to reboot his laptop to finish an update in the middle of the day, which is something we never, ever do. He then shows me the laptop and leaves. Because people are usually at work and really irritated by reboots during the day, the system hangs on starting after a reboot and the message cannot be cancelled. As calls start to arrive at our help desk describing the same problem, a panic sets in. Management demands answers since I hadn't pushed anything in days. I start looking at my coworker who denies any knowledge about anything. After a few minutes of sleuthing on our software package management server, I find a package uploaded by the coworker and scheduled to begin pushing at 11 a.m. It's now 1 p.m., and the contents of the package have been deployed to over 1,000 systems. I re-question my coworker about his actions and the contents of the package as management watches over my shoulder and scans the server. He once more claims to be unaware of the deployment operation, but admits that the package might have included a crucial security update that needed to be sent. I examine the update package, and sure enough, it contains a security update, but only for one of the 3 OS versions that are being used throughout the network. Now, normally this is acceptable because the OS Maker's update has safeguards in place to prevent deployment/installation on any OS that is not designed for usage on, but more importantly, in order to limit installation, the coworker manually removed every package safety check. In other words, he just destroyed 2/3 of network user systems. When I check the management server again and see that the killer package is still deploying, I immediately halted and analyzed the server's logs to see which account produced the package, the deployment task, and the timetable. Everything seemed to point to the coworker's account. Once more, management approaches me and queries what can be done. A complete system rebuild for all impacted systems was my response. No, I can't just fix it, because now none of the systems will even boot. No, there isn't a magic undo setting for security update that replaces key OS files. For the following 3 weeks, the majority of the IT team worked to reconstruct systems during the day, at night, on weekends, etc. The overtime was tremendous. The frustration from almost 2,000 users called for a head to roll. People who earned 3 or 6 times as much as I did had to wait while their systems were repaired. The estimated cost of missed time was well over $250,000, not to mention the diminished trust in the IT division. When upper management arrived seeking explanations, I gave them all the information I had, including what had occurred, how it could have been avoided, and who was responsible for the mess. I merely stated the facts without passing judgment. After all, I had to do it. The middle management who had promoted the employee made every effort to portray the incident as unavoidable, despite though it was simply preventable or never should have happened in the first place. But eventually, upper management listened to me and this coworker was fired on the spot with no right to work for that company again. What was the HOA's biggest mistake? The fact that they exist is a huge mistake. Although a neighbor, not us, experienced this, after a significant hailstorm, 90% of the homes required new roofs. Well, they offered 3 color options after the insurance companies began inspecting the roofs. Despite having slightly differing colors, they were all brown. Withered wood was the approved color. The majority of insurance providers offered that specific hue, but a few didn't. If the purchaser desired the uncovered color, they would have to pay for all of the shingles. Naturally, the 3 houses without that choice chose a different covered brown. There are so many different shades of brown that you hardly even notice them. A few weeks after the roofs were all repaired, the HOA sent letters to the 3 residences informing them that their choice of color was incorrect and that they would need to replace the roof once more at their own expense. The letter was thrown away after they all laughed. The HOA then went on to spend money to engage the greatest attorney in the city to sue these folks for having slightly less brown roofs. When word spread around the community, more than 100 homeowners attended the next regular meeting instead of just the self-appointed covenants, as they like to refer to themselves, and their lackeys. A single person moved for a vote on whether to discontinue using community funds for the litigation, and a startling 100 to 11 votes were cast in favor of doing so. Justice won out. My buddies and I used to hang out in this area when I was around 16 or 17, but we weren't the bad kids. For some reason, the head of the HOA detested us, or maybe all teenagers, I'm not sure. The one instance I'll never forget. It was a typical day when I got home from school, and my mother greeted me at the door by saying, "So, the deputy fire chief called me this morning." Okay, I'm thinking now, why all the fuss? Evidently, some young people had hurled Molotov cocktails throughout the neighborhood, and Miss High and Mighty HOA had phoned 911 and identified me and my companions as the perpetrators. Since I spent the entire night that night playing Xbox, it is obvious it was impossible. In the end, the fire chief called me and my friends one by one to his office to explain our whereabouts that evening, and he wouldn't stop. He even had a satellite image of the crime scene with a red line pointing back to my house, claiming that he had police dogs sniff out our trail. We all had evidence of where we were and what we did, but it wasn't good enough because it had to be our fault because we were just stupid kids. After a while, it appears that no one was charged, but a few years later, guess who was discovered selling outrageously expensive pool passes to visitors from outside the area so they could use our pool? Miss High and Mighty herself, that is. When I saw that email, I was ecstatic, and I was more happier to learn that she had to repay the thousands of dollars she had stolen. So, that's the reason I believe in karma. I'm late to this, but I lived with my dad in a condo throughout high school. There was a rules committee in the condominium's version of the HOA. In essence, this committee was just one bitter old woman, the kind that would use any justification to shout at a teen for enjoying themselves. A new regulation reading "No skateboarding" would be posted after I skateboarded. This crazy old lady would sit in her truck at night at the gate and record who was coming and going, just really over-the-top kind of ass. She believed herself to be a police officer. After work, she would yell at my father as soon as he got out of the car because he had left an exterior door, a corridor with the front doors for each unit, open for 20 minutes to let in some fresh air. So my dad decided to run for association president and win, effectively fired the insane woman by dissolving the rules committee, removing all power from her, then stop. The rules committee was never reinstated. I'm so proud for my dad when I tell this story. Background. When I was growing up, our home was in an unmarked area. It was full of businessmen with huge egos and their trophy wives, and the wives would get bored and report each other to the HOA for petty ass. In any case, this guy had the best yard in the area, spent over $100,000 on it. The neighbor across the street didn't like to look at the fountain that was afterwards installed by him. Short version, after 2 years of court battles over this fountain, it all came to an end when a meeting of the HOA turned physical in the middle of the street. Due to how out of control things became, the guy gave in. The best thing is that he handed the fountain to a man who, despite living at the edge of our community, was technically outside the HOA subdivision. You couldn't drive into our neighborhood without your mirror almost scraping the thing. Beautiful justice. In the early 1940s, my great-grandfather was one of the first people to construct a home in a particular area of the Florida Keys. The only residence having a single electricity line going to it was this one. Over time, people erected structures around him. Due to being grandfathered in, our house was excluded from laws and building codes that were passed because it was one of the first structures built. Eventually, the neighborhood that had grown up around us decided to create an HOA in order to improve the neighborhood. My family never joined the HOA. Why? Because we did fine before they came and will continue to. The HOA members determined during a meeting, I believe it was in the 1980s, that for the sake of uniformity, every house in the neighborhood ought to be repainted in gray, white, or boring colors. Our house was white but hadn't been painted in a while. An HOA member was voted to go inform my grandma of their decision, and we needed to repaint the house. When the member came, they politely explained the situation and what my grandma was required to do to comply. She thanked them formally and promised to address the issue. My granny gathered the entire family together the very following week, and they painted the house a vibrant conch pink. The HOA residents exclaimed, "WTF, we did not tell you to do this. You must paint it in one of our authorized colors." My grandma's response, "We were here first, B." She was right. They couldn't do/enforce anything because we were literally the first to settle in the area. They haven't included us in the HOA meetings/decisions in decades. Thank you for listening to these stories. If you want to see new videos, be sure to subscribe to the channel and don't forget to hit the like button.